You're looking at the corridor that powers the modern world. 20% of the world's oil moves through this water every day. Iran controls the northern shore. On the southern side, Oman, a country surrounded by proxy wars, sectarian conflict, and the most contested maritime lane on Earth. And yet, Oman has not fired a shot at a neighbor in over half a century. In the Middle East's most volatile neighborhood, one country chose a different path. What it built instead is extraordinary. Before we get to this peaceful sultanate, there are 3 facts you need to hear, because they'll completely change how you see Oman. And some of them are so surprising, most people don't know they exist. As we prepare to dive into these incredible scenes, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to Worldly. Fact 1. The corridor of power. Every day, roughly 20% of the world's entire oil supply passes through a corridor 33 kilometers wide at its narrowest point. The Strait of Hormuz. Iran controls the northern shore. Oman controls the southern shore through the Musandam Peninsula, a fragment of Omani territory physically separated from the rest of the country by the United Arab Emirates. This geography is not incidental to Oman's identity. It defines it. Oman's control of the southern Hormuz coastline places it at one of the most consequential geographic positions on Earth. A position it has managed not through military aggression or diplomatic brinkmanship, but through a consistent policy of neutrality that has made it indispensable to the stability of the passage. When the strait is tense, the world calls Muscat. When negotiations need a neutral venue, the world comes to Oman. 20% of the world's oil moves through water that Oman partially controls. That is not a small thing. Fact 2. The third way. Islam has 2 major branches that have defined the Middle East's sectarian geography for 14 centuries. Sunni, Shia. Oman practices neither. Ibadi Islam, the faith of approximately 75% of Oman's population, predates the Sunni-Shia split, tracing its origins to the earliest generation of Islamic scholars. It places extraordinary emphasis on consultation, modesty, tolerance, and the separation of religious and political authority. Ibadi Islam is practiced in only a handful of places globally, Oman being by far the largest and most significant. Its theological emphasis on avoiding excess, including the excess of sectarian conflict, has given Oman's leadership a genuine philosophical framework for the neutrality it practices. This is not simply diplomatic calculation, it is theology in action. A faith that rejects the binary that has produced so much of the region's conflict has produced, in Oman, a country that moves between opposing sides because its own tradition places it outside both. Fact 3. The Ocean Empire. Before the oil era, before the modern state, before the current Sultan's 50-year modernization program, Oman was an empire. At its height in the 18th and 19th centuries, the Omani Sultanate controlled territory stretching from the Arabian Peninsula across the Indian Ocean to the East African coast, including Zanzibar, the island's spice trade hub that gave Oman access to markets extending into the African interior. Omani sailors navigated the Indian Ocean trade routes using monsoon wind patterns, the same seasonal winds that determined when ships could travel between Arabia, India, and Africa, with a precision and reliability that made Muscat one of the most significant commercial ports in the pre-modern world. The dhow, the traditional wooden sailing vessel of the Omani coast, is still built here by craftsmen whose techniques trace back to the Ocean Empire. Oman was a maritime superpower before most of Europe had mapped the waters it routinely crossed. That history of confident, outward-looking engagement with the world did not disappear when the empire contracted. It became Omani character. The world's most dangerous bottleneck. The cliffs fall without warning. One moment the road runs through dry mountain terrain, unremarkable in its aridity, and then the earth simply ends. Vertical rock faces plunging hundreds of meters to the blue water below. The fjord carved by ancient geological forces into a depth that seems inconsistent with a desert landscape. This is the Musandam Peninsula, and it is one of the most strategically significant pieces of geography on Earth. The Musandam is physically separated from the rest of Oman by a strip of UAE territory, an exclave, geographically isolated, accessible by sea or by road through the UAE. Its population is small, its infrastructure is minimal, but its position at the entrance to the Strait of Hormuz, its cliffs overlooking the mandatory shipping lanes, gives it a strategic weight far beyond anything its size would suggest. From certain points on the Musandam coast, you can see Iran. On a clear day, the distance is approximately 55 kilometers. The fjords of Musandam were formed by the flooding of ancient river valleys when sea levels rose at the end of the last ice age, a geological process that produced dramatic inlet systems whose walls dropped to depths of hundreds of meters, creating conditions that support whale sharks, dolphins, and coral ecosystems unusual in the otherwise shallow Gulf. The Kumzari people, the indigenous community of the Musandam coast, speak a language found nowhere else on Earth. Kumzari draws from Arabic, Persian, Portuguese, and other languages encountered through centuries of maritime contact in the strait, combining them into a hybrid that is the linguistic record of everything that has passed through this water. The fjords look Norwegian. The language sounds like no other place in the world. Both are expressions of the same fact. Musandam is where the world's traffic meets Oman's oldest edge. The quiet capital of diplomacy. Muscat does not announce itself. There are no towers competing for the skyline, no architectural spectacle performing for a global audience. The city spreads low and white along the Gulf of Oman coastline, pressed between the water and the Al-Hajar Mountains that rise immediately behind it. Its scale modest for a capital that plays a role in global diplomacy that much larger cities cannot claim. The Mutra Corniche is where Muscat's history is most legible. The old harbour that received trading vessels from India, East Africa, and Persia for centuries, still flanked by the same mountain ridges, still containing the fort that controlled access to the port in the era when Oman was an ocean empire. The souk behind the Corniche, covered, fragrant, dense, carries the memory of that trade. Frankincense, the aromatic resin harvested in Oman's southern Dhofar region, has been traded from this coast for 3,000 years. The smell of Mutra souk is the smell of Oman's commercial history. Muscat is the city where Iran and the United States held secret negotiations that led to the 2015 nuclear agreement, where Taliban and US representatives have communicated through Omani intermediaries, where warring factions across the region have found, in Oman's foreign ministry, a channel that both sides trust precisely because Oman has never taken either side. This is not small. In a region where mistrust is the default and direct communication is often impossible, Muscat functions as the region's essential back channel, the room where conversations happen that cannot happen anywhere else. The Sultan Qaboos bin Said, who ruled Oman from 1970 until his death in 2020, built this diplomatic identity alongside the physical infrastructure of the modern state. He found Oman underdeveloped and isolated in 1970. He left it connected, respected, and genuinely trusted by parties that trusted almost no one else. The city he built reflects the philosophy he practiced: quiet, considered, confident without volume. Oman's economic future. Duqm was nothing 40 years ago, a small fishing village on Oman's remote central coast, accessible only by difficult desert road, serving a local population with no reason to appear on any commercial map. Today, it is one of the most ambitious economic development projects in the Arabian Peninsula. The Special Economic Zone at Duqm covers approximately 2,000 square kilometers, an area larger than some countries, encompassing a deep water port, a dry dock capable of handling supertankers, an airport, a refinery, industrial zones, and a planned residential and commercial city designed to attract international business away from the congested Gulf ports to the north. Duqm's strategic advantage is its position. Unlike Kuwait, Bahrain, and Qatar, whose export infrastructure depends on navigating the Strait of Hormuz, Duqm sits on the Arabian Sea, south of the strait, with direct access to Indian Ocean shipping lanes that reach Asia, East Africa, and beyond, without passing through any choke point. Oman's oil reserves are significant, but smaller than its neighbors and projected to deplete within decades. The current Sultan Haitham, who succeeded Qaboos in 2020, has accelerated the diversification program, positioning Duqm as the physical infrastructure of an economy that will function after the oil. This is not aspiration, it is engineering. The port is built, the dry dock is operational, the industrial facilities are running. Duqm is the answer to a question that every Gulf state must eventually face, and Oman is answering it in concrete and steel on a remote coastline that the rest of the world has not yet fully noticed. Power, faith, and identity. The Sultan Qaboos Grand Mosque took 6 years to build. 20,000 workers, 300,000 tons of Indian sandstone. The largest hand-woven carpet in the world, covering the main prayer hall's floor in a single piece, requiring 12 years and 600 women to complete. Everything here was built at the scale of a declaration. The chandelier suspended beneath the main dome contains over 600,000 Swarovski crystals and weighs 14 tons. It is not excess for its own sake. It is light, specifically, that Islamic architecture has always used to communicate the divine. The dome above it rises 50 meters. The light entering from the clerestory windows moves across the interior throughout the day, the prayer hall changing character with each hour. The geometry of the space designed to engage with light in ways that reward the extended presence the mosque is meant to encourage. Oman's Ibadi tradition does not share the austere rejection of beauty that characterizes some Islamic architectural traditions. The Sultan Qaboos Grand Mosque is evidence that Ibadi faith is entirely compatible with extraordinary artistic ambition, that the modesty Ibadi theology emphasizes applies to behavior, not to the spaces built for worship. The mosque is open to non-Muslim visitors. The guided tours are careful, respectful, and genuinely informative about Ibadi practice in a way that most visitors to Islamic architecture rarely encounter. More than any single monument in Oman, the Sultan Qaboos Grand Mosque tells the story of what Sultan Qaboos was trying to build: a modern Islamic state that honored its faith at the highest level while engaging confidently with the world beyond its borders. The mosque faces the road that leads to Muscat's diplomatic quarter. The symbolism was not accidental. The Grand Canyon of Arabia. The earth opens here. Wadi Nakhr, the Grand Canyon of Arabia, drops over 1,000 meters from the rim of Jebel Shams to the canyon floor below, its walls of layered limestone and dolomite descending in a series of vertical faces and talus slopes that the early morning light illuminates sequentially, the shadow line moving down the canyon wall as the sun rises. Jebel Shams, Mountain of the Sun, is the highest peak in Oman, rising to over 3,000 meters in the Al-Hajar range. At this altitude, the Arabian Peninsula surprises completely. The temperature drops, the vegetation changes. Juniper and wild fig grow in the higher elevations. Villages cling to the mountain's terraced faces at heights that make their construction seem implausible. Misfat al-Abriyin, a terraced mountain village of ancient stone construction, its Falaj irrigation channels, still feeding gardens with water drawn from mountain springs, has been inhabited for centuries by a community that built its life in a space that the mountain allows but does not make easy. The Falaj system, the ancient Omani water management infrastructure that channels spring water through gravity-fed channels to agricultural land, is a UNESCO World Heritage designation in its own right. Oman's network of ancient Falaj predates Islam by centuries and represents one of the most sophisticated pre-modern hydraulic engineering systems in the world. The water moving through Misfat al-Abriyin's channels today follows the same course it followed 1,000 years ago. From the Jebel Sham's rim on clear days, the canyon and its surrounding landscape create a visual experience that reconfigures the visitor's expectation of what Arabia looks like. This is not sand. This is not flat. This is a mountain range of genuine geological drama, carved by ancient water into forms that rival anything the American Southwest contains, and visited by a fraction of the people who travel to see comparable landscapes elsewhere. Hidden oasis in the desert. The wadi announces itself with color. From above, the line of green cutting through the pale desert rock is visible from a distance, a geological crack filled with life, fed by a freshwater stream whose source is somewhere in the mountains above and whose destination is the sea below. Wadi Shab. The journey into Wadi Shab is sequential, each turn in the canyon revealing the next section, the walls narrowing and widening, the water appearing and disappearing, the vegetation becoming denser as the path descends. The pools are turquoise. The specific shade, produced by the mineral content of the water and the white limestone of the canyon floor reflecting upward through it, exists in a range that seems artificially enhanced until you are standing in it, and then it seems simply true. At the canyon's deepest accessible section, a narrow passage between rock walls leads to an interior chamber, a cave with a waterfall entering from above, the pool beneath it cold and clear, the light entering from the cave opening in a single shaft. You reach it by swimming. There is no other way in. The effort required is the reason the place is what it is. Wadi Shab is not on most global travel itineraries. It requires a drive east of Muscat on an increasingly remote road, a boat crossing, a walk, and a swim. It rewards all of it completely. Oman is full of places like this, landscapes of extraordinary quality that ask something of the visitor before they reveal themselves fully. This is not an accident of geography. It is a kind of selection. The endless desert and Bedouin life. The Wahiba Sands cover approximately 12,000 square kilometers of central Oman. They begin abruptly. The road simply ends where the desert starts, the pavement giving way to sand without transition. And extend south in a landscape of dunes reaching over 100 meters in height. Their crests sharp and wind-sculpted, their faces alternating between the windward compaction and the leeward slip face that gives large dunes their characteristic asymmetry. At dawn, the dune shadows are long and precise. The geometry of the landscape at its most legible. Each ridge and hollow visible in the raking light before the sun rises high enough to flatten the contrast. The color shifts. Gold at sunrise, pale amber at midday, deep red-orange at the final light. The Wahiba Sands are never the same color twice. The Bedouin communities of the Wahiba have navigated this landscape for centuries. Their understanding of sand, its movement, its stability, the locations of water beneath it, the routes between reliable grazing areas, accumulated and transmitted across generations in a knowledge system that has no written record and requires no map. The camels that carry this knowledge, or rather carry the people who hold it, are as well adapted to the Wahiba as the dunes themselves. Their feet spread on sand. Their bodies store water. Their endurance across 40-degree terrain is not a limitation overcome. It is evolution's specific answer to a specific question. Modern Oman has connected the Bedouin communities of the Wahiba to schools, clinics, and infrastructure that previous generations lacked entirely. The transformation of the past 50 years, from near complete isolation to connectivity, has been rapid enough that both realities coexist in living memory. The dunes are unchanged. The people who live among them are both connected to their past and fully part of the present. The Middle East's tropical secret. Between June and September, something happens in southern Oman that does not happen anywhere else on the Arabian Peninsula. The monsoon arrives. The Khareef, the seasonal southwest monsoon that originates in the Indian Ocean, reaches the Dhofar coast of Oman and transforms the landscape with a completeness that first-time visitors consistently describe as impossible. Mountains that are brown and dry in May are green in July. Waterfalls appear on cliff faces that carry no water 8 months of the year. Mist moves through valleys at elevations where clear desert heat is the norm. The Dhofar Mountains act as a barrier that catches the monsoon moisture and forces it upward, where it cools and condenses, producing rainfall and persistent mist in a landscape that the same moisture passes over elsewhere without stopping. The result is a microclimate unique in the region. Frankincense trees, the Boswellia sacra that produces the aromatic resin traded from this coast for 3,000 years, grow on these slopes in conditions unlike those found anywhere else in Arabia. The Khareef is why they are here. The moisture that makes them possible is the same moisture that made this coast the origin point of one of the ancient world's most valuable trade commodities. Salalah, the capital of Dhofar, becomes a destination during Khareef that draws visitors from across the Gulf seeking the specific experience of green in a region defined by the absence of it. Families from the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Kuwait arrive in tens of thousands to stand in mist, to walk beside waterfalls, to sit in grass. The demand reveals something about the psychological weight of living in desert heat. Even for people who have always lived in the Gulf, green remains a profound relief. Ancient turtle migration. They have been doing this for 110 million years, long before humans existed to observe it, long before the concept of Oman existed, long before the Arabian Peninsula had the shape it currently holds. Green sea turtles have been returning to the beaches where they hatched to lay their own eggs, following a navigational precision encoded in their biology that science has still not fully mapped. Ras Al Jinz, at the easternmost tip of the Arabian Peninsula, is one of the largest and most important green sea turtle nesting sites in the world. 20,000 turtles nest here annually. Oman has protected this beach since the 1970s, one of the earliest marine conservation efforts in the Gulf region, predating international conservation frameworks that would eventually recognize Ras Al Jinz as a protected area. The turtles arrive at night, navigating by magnetic field signatures they imprinted during their own hatching decades before. A green sea turtle nesting at Ras Al Jinz tonight may have hatched on this exact beach 25 years ago, spent its entire adult life in the Indian Ocean, and returned to this specific stretch of sand by a mechanism that required no map, no landmark, and no external guidance. The beach simply called them back. At dawn, after the nesting adults have returned to the sea, hatchlings from earlier nests emerge. dozens of small turtles scrambling toward the water in the first light, their orientation perfect, their urgency absolute. They move toward the reflection of the open sky on the water. Evolution programmed them to read the horizon. They have been getting it right for 110 million years. The spiritual and historical core. Nizwa was Oman's capital before Muscat, the center of Ibadi scholarship, the seat of the Ibadi Imamate, the religious political leadership structure that governed Oman's interior for centuries. The place where the theological and political philosophy that defines Oman's character was developed, argued, codified, and transmitted across generations. The Nizwa Fort is dominated by its main tower, a circular structure 40 meters in diameter and 30 meters in height, built in the 17th century on the foundations of earlier fortifications. Its construction required over 12 years and produced a defensive structure whose design reflected specific lessons learned from the Portuguese attacks on Oman's coast in the preceding century. The tower is hollow at its base. The entrance is deliberately obscure. Every feature of the design is a response to a specific threat that the builders had experienced firsthand. Nizwa's Friday market, the traditional livestock and produce market held in the town centre, continues a commercial tradition that has existed here for centuries. The silver souk alongside it carries Omani silverwork in a tradition of craftsmanship whose patterns and techniques are specific to this region, distinguishable from the jewelry traditions of neighboring cultures by the specific geometric language that Omani craftsmen have maintained across generations. The Jama Nizwa Mosque, one of the oldest in Oman, sits at the fort's edge. The relationship between the fort and the mosque is not incidental in Nizwa. Military authority and religious authority were, in the Ibadi Imamate tradition, understood as requiring each other's legitimacy. The Imam was both political and spiritual leader. The fort protected the mosque. The mosque gave the fort its purpose. Oman begins and ends here. Not geographically, not commercially, philosophically. In the theology developed in this highland town, in the specific Ibadi insistence that leadership must be earned through righteousness rather than bloodline, that the community has the right to hold its leaders accountable, that neutrality between competing powers is not weakness but wisdom. The Oman that negotiates between Iran and the United States finds its deepest roots. The diplomacy practiced in Muscat was first theorized in Nizwa. The peace that distinguishes Oman from its neighbors has an ancient intellectual foundation. Oman is the question the Middle East doesn't ask loudly enough. How does a country surrounded by conflict choose peace and hold it? The answer is somewhere between ancient theology, strategic wisdom, and landscapes so extraordinary they suggest the land itself demands a different kind of attention. Subscribe to Worldly. The journey continues.